Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com here, literally a day and a half after Carl Froch's masterpiece against Arthur Abraham. Let me just say, on my scorecard, watching the fight live with commentary that was in a language I did not understand, I had Carl Froch winning all 12 rounds. I thought he looked spectacular. I thought he looked like he was at the top of his game. His performance, quite frankly, greatly exceeded my expectations. He showed a great jab. He was able to come in, hit Abraham in the body. He was able to move back out. And I thought Carl Froch showed that he's a highly skilled fighter. Take a look at his defense. He's able to hide his chin behind his left shoulder. He is able to keep that left hand dangling. He, like David Haye, like Roy Jones, he is able to feint, and he also is able to use a jab when he needs to use the jab. And he is a master at maintaining distance in the ring and spacing. Now, all of that said, and as much as I like Carl Froch, and keep in mind, if you go back through my videos, you'll see that I picked a lesser-known Carl Froch when he fought Jean Pascal many moons ago. As much as I like Carl Froch, I'm picking Glen Johnson to beat Carl Froch. This is a fight where, as I make this video, I haven't seen any odds from any of the casinos, and I'm probably going to have to do a week of the fight video on it if the odds come out and surprise me. But I'm expecting Glen Johnson to be a big underdog in this fight. And let me just say that as great as Carl Froch is, and certainly any guy who fights Andre Durrell, Mikkel Kessler, and Arthur Abraham, and is able to hold his own against those three, is certainly an elite fighter. It's my belief that styles make fights, and Carl Froch's style, if you remove some hand speed, reminds me a lot of Roy Jones's style. And my point to you is that Glen Johnson, of course, was the second man to stop Roy Jones, and I still consider that fight to be the best film of the deconstruction of Roy Jones. I understand Danny Green knocked him out in one round, but I thought that the Glen Johnson demolition of Roy Jones was the most methodical demolition of Roy Jones over the course of an entire fight. Keep in mind, Tarver knocked him out early the first time Jones hit the canvas. The Glen Johnson fight, I thought, was systemic. I thought Johnson had developed a certain style to beat Roy Jones, and I believe that style also will beat Carl Froch. Let's talk about what that style is. Now, Carl Froch, as I see it, stays about 2.5 to 3 feet in front of you, right? He's outside. He's not close enough to get hit unless you really come at him, right? Then, like Roy Jones, he has his hand down, his left hand, it's dangling, and he's feinting, just like David Haye, same style, right? He feints when he twitches a shoulder. And when you think that he's going to throw a left hook, right, he twitches his left shoulder, and someone like Arthur Abraham then raised his guard to guard against the left that never came. Froch then comes in and hits you to the body, hits you with other punches, right? What he's in effect doing is counterpunching you without throwing the punches, right? And his fights, he fights off of a rhythm. Watch him. He's away from you. He tries to dictate tempo. He's away from you. He's twitching. He's feinting. He's throwing a jab. Then he's coming in when he wants to, and he's hitting you with an array of punches, right? Then, of course, he'll back out against Arthur Abraham, and I was surprised at this. Look at the film. He was able to back out with his hands down because he knew Abraham did not have the foot speed to take that step forward to catch him. Now understand Glen Johnson's style, his bounce. Take a look at the Roy Jones film. Glen Johnson's bouncing in that film, right? He's bouncing. That bounce is ingenious because what it does is it takes the timing away from a feinter. You know Glen Johnson's going to try to walk you down. You know Glen Johnson's not going to give you the room to operate, and that's what Carl Froch needs. You also know, too, that Glen Johnson's not sticking around to worry about your feints. Not only that, because he's bouncing, it totally throws off the timing of a chess player like Carl Froch, who really is trying to read and react. Here you have a guy who's throwing a heavy volume of punches, who's in close, too close for comfort, right? He takes away the distance that guys like Roy Jones, who Glen Johnson knocked out, and Carl Froch rely upon. Then he comes in and he's throwing a very high volume of punches. Also, take a look at Glen Johnson's record. You'll see a lot of losses. Understand, Glen Johnson in the last 2 years has only lost. In fact, let's go back further than that. Let's go back to 2006. Let's go back to the Clinton Woods fight. He's only lost to 3 men: Clinton Woods, Chad Dawson, who I consider to be the most skilled guy I've seen in the sport right now, him and Floyd Mayweather, and Tavares Cloud, who hits awfully hard for a light heavyweight, right? And keep in mind, too, Johnson went the distance in all of his losses. He even fought Chad Dawson multiple times, never got knocked down. Note that heavyweight Tomas Ademic cannot say the same thing, right? So Glen Johnson has a brick chin. He's been fighting at a higher weight division than Carl Froch. Carl Froch is super middle. Glen Johnson fought Tavares Cloud, a hard hitter at light heavyweight, right? Glen Johnson is really a light heavyweight. And so Johnson has been hit by hard punchers. Being hit by Carl Froch is not going to faze him that much. Glen Johnson is a survivor. The question I have is whether Carl Froch is going to be able to handle being pursued in the ring. Let's talk about the guys who fought him, who Carl Froch looked great against. Jean Pascal. Pascal is almost a light heavyweight version of Manny Pacquiao in my eyes. In other words, he's an ambush fighter, right? He comes in, he hits you, he backs back out, right? He doesn't mount a sustained attack. He doesn't come inside and then stay inside, right? So Carl Froch was able to get some of the spacing he needed. Jermaine Taylor. And let me point out, I picked Froch against Jermaine Taylor at a time when Jermaine Taylor was favored in that fight, right? Video's still up on YouTube. But Jermaine Taylor is a guy who works behind a jab from distance, right? Jermaine Taylor doesn't come in and completely smother you. He likes to work behind a jab. That's very different than Glen Johnson, where maybe you'll see a couple of token jabs, but then Glen Johnson's going to be up in your chest trying to hit you with hooks and crosses, right? That's a different fight style. Andre Durrell. And here again, I picked Froch over Durrell, although when I saw the fight, I thought Durrell got robbed. But understand, Durrell's game in that fight was to outmaneuver Carl Froch. In other words, he was staying outside on Froch, and he was moving faster than Froch could move because Durrell had a foot speed advantage. When Froch came inside, Durrell held on to him, right? Durrell, in fact, many people claimed, excessively held in that fight. Now, that's very different, again, than Glen Johnson, right? Glen Johnson doesn't want to run away from Carl Froch. Glen Johnson's going to be in Carl Froch's face. Also, when people hold in Glen Johnson's fights, it's usually the other guy. It's not Glen Johnson. Let's also talk about, Mikhail Kessler. Kessler really is a fighter who, while he's higher level than Arthur Abraham, he works behind a jab and he's on rails. Not a lot of lateral movement, right? And he was coming in on Froch. He was shooting a jab, and then he was getting back out. He wanted some distance on Froch. Quite frankly, I thought that fight was closer than the official scores. There's even a moment in that fight where Froch hits Kessler, and Kessler hits the canvas, and the referee claimed that it was a trip. I understand the videotape is a little bit ambiguous there. My point to you is Kessler showed much more respect, much more deference for Carl Froch's punching power than a light heavyweight like Glen Johnson is going to show, right? I don't think Carl Froch has been in with a guy who's going to literally take away the spacing that Carl Froch is accustomed to and take away the feints that Carl Froch is accustomed to. Also, take a look at the Carl Froch Abraham fight. You're going to see that in a dominant performance, even one where Froch comes in and lands some clean punches, you're going to see that Froch can't stay in. He doesn't know how to fight inside, right? Carl Froch needs that 2.5 feet to operate. He's not a guy who fights inside. In fact, you'll see he's not even trying to smother Arthur Abraham on the ropes. And keep in mind, Abraham was doing a great impersonation of a statue, right? Was throwing low volume, was not moving his feet that much, seemed befuddled by Carl's jab, right? Kept his hands up, didn't have his hands down, so when his hands were up, he couldn't fight back. Now contrast that with Glen Johnson, where when you start throwing punches on Glen Johnson, while he always has a hand by his temple, no question about it, you'll notice that Glen Johnson's still throwing punches. In other words, Johnson wants a shootout because Johnson feels that he can roll his shoulders and get in your chest and deal with a shootout better than you can. So, I know Johnson's in his 40s. Let me just say that as I make this video several months out from the fight, this is a line that I want to see posted. I want to see what they have Glen Johnson posted at. If Glen Johnson, if you're getting better than a plus 200 on Glen Johnson, I know I personally am going to try to take advantage of that line. I'm expecting the line, by the way, to be much higher than that. I'm expecting Froch, because of his dominant performance, to be a bit overvalued, right? Fighters after dominant performances against quality competition usually are. But I know I personally am going to try to take advantage of the early odds on Glen Johnson before people realize that Glen Johnson is a light heavy fighting at super middle, and that even though Glen Johnson's a 41-year-old man, Glen Johnson's going to be in Carl Froch's chest, and Carl Froch, quite frankly, might not know what to do inside. Also, Glen Johnson's going to be throwing a volume of punches that, quite frankly, Carl Froch did not experience against Arthur Abraham, and Johnson's going to be doing it without the heavy jab count of Mikhail Kessler in his fight, right? Froch, keep in mind, world-class fighter, not here to say otherwise, but there's a big difference between fighting a Jean Pascal who is, sporadic, comes in, throws combinations, gets back out, moves away from you, right? Then plants his next attack, right? Big difference between an ambush fighter like Jean Pascal and a fighter who knocks on your front door, comes into your living room, starts hitting you in the chest, and then is just moving side to side on you. Froch also, what I encourage everyone to do is take a film of Roy Jones, take a film of Carl Froch, look at both of their left hands. Look at how they're both perpendicular to you, right? They're literally standing with just the left shoulder in front of you, right? Look at how they're feinting. They're not throwing a lot of jabs. They have jabs, right? Froch threw a jab against Abraham from time to time, but he's not a jabber like, let's say, Vitaly Klitschko is, right? He's not living off a jab. He's not Vladimir Klitschko. He's not living off a jab, right? He's throwing a sporadic jab. His real game is to feint, come in, throw hard punches, hit you a few times in the ribs, get back out. Come in, throw looping punches around your guard, get back out, right? Take a look at the Glen Johnson-Roy Jones fight. People who leave comments for this video, tell me why this fight won't go the same way as Glen Johnson against Roy Jones. Okay, I'd love to hear from you. This is Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com. Leave your comments for me here on YouTube, and look us up, gamblersadvisory.com, on Facebook. Also, you know,